Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another live session at the Reactor. My name is Rav, and I'm the program manager here at Reactor London. Before we get into the session, please take a moment to read our code of conduct. We're all here to learn, so please be respectful, please be kind, ask a lot of good questions. The chat will be open throughout, and we do encourage you all to participate. Today, we are partnering up with GitHub on this absolutely amazing session, which is called Unlocking the Power of Strategic Partnerships with GitHub. And with that, I'm now going to bring up the folks on stage to take this away. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
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 All right, let me kick off. So, hi, everybody. My name is Maya Ross. I am one of the VPs of product management at GitHub, and I will be hosting today's session. I will just briefly introduce myself and then hand over to our panelists to introduce themselves. So I've been at GitHub for about 5 years now, worked in the tech space for much longer. And my job at GitHub is to really ensure that our developer experiences are the best in the industry. Previously, I worked on our enterprise platform, so ensuring that all of GitHub meets the needs of enterprise customers from a security, scalability, and compliance and administration perspective. And then about a year ago, I moved over to lead our teams who are building all of GitHub's core developer experiences. So I'm lucky enough to have worked across enterprise administration, planning and tracking, PR workflows, kind of the full gamut of GitHub. I'm super excited to be joined by 4 of our partners today. And so I'm going to hand over to them to introduce themselves, starting with Jesse from Xebia.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jesse Houwing. I am an architect within Xebia. We do migrations as well as onboarding, as well as enablement of all kinds of things GitHub. It's been an honor to be here, Maya. Thank you very much for inviting us all.
Thank you for being here. Florian?
Yep. Hi, everyone. Florian. I'm with Prodyna for now almost 17 years. We mainly do custom software development, and I've been doing architecture in many ways at many customers, and yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Matthias?
Yeah, hi everyone. Matthias from Solidify. My title is the CTO at the company, and I was part of the founding team 11 years ago. So I guess the title doesn't mean so much, but we used to be the DevOps and TFS guys back in the days. Nowadays we do, of course, a lot of DevOps work with GitHub, and but also Azure and other modern compliance and regulation type of work. And also had the pleasure to be a part of the Microsoft MVP community for, we recognized, 16 years. So go back a long time with Jesse and others. So great to be part of another community event, which has a little bit different angle today when we're going to talk about partnerships as well. So great to be here.
Awesome. Marco?
Hi, good to see everybody. I'm Marco. I'm the CTO of Eficode. Eficode is a 650 people organization spread in 10 countries, mostly, of course, in Europe, so Nordics and continental Europe. Our mission is to build the future of software development, and naturally, DevOps is in the center of that. And then we see one of the big trends that we see is tool chain consolidation, and naturally, GitHub plays there one of the biggest roles. That's why we're here.
Excellent. Nice. All right, so the purpose of this discussion today is to share tips, tricks, and insights for companies who are really looking to undergo some kind of digital transformation, whether that is adopting the cloud, making the most of AI innovations and how they can unlock productivity and velocity and developer happiness with those, or overcome scale challenges or drive DevOps culture transformations. There's a lot of things that we know enterprise customers come to GitHub or come to our partners or come to looking at the DevOps tool landscape with goals in mind. And, our goal today is to try to provide you with some insights and guidance on how GitHub as a company, as well as our expert partners, think about some of those problems. So I'm going to jump in, start by asking you all some questions, starting with, that challenge of like, I'd love to hear how you have seen companies out there that you work with overcome the challenges of driving a DevOps culture or driving productivity within their organizations while still maintaining kind of governance and compliance at scale. This is a problem that is personally very close to my heart. And I would love to hear from you. What are some of the ways that you have seen companies and worked with them to drive that balance of transformation, innovation, agility with governance and compliance at scale at the same time? And I'm going to pick on Marco to kick us off.
Thank you so much. So we had a session with Daimler back in this spring with Gene Kim's conference. One of the things that you can see in the modern organizations, like the bigger the organizations that are, the more they have tooling in place. And usually it's quite scattered in the organizations. You would see like shadow IT and teams tinkering with their own tools, and that's taking quite a bit of their time. So the research shows that developers are spending like at least 30% of their time working on the tooling and tooling maintenance. And as I already said, the tool chain consolidation is definitely one of the biggest trend in organizations. And then the same way as, for example, in Daimler, what they did was in 3 years' time, they built a new tool chain as they split from Mercedes-Benz, and they were able to save 40% of their whole tooling ecosystem. And one of the key drivers of these kinds of movements is, of course, GitHub. So all of the developers already know GitHub. They use GitHub, if not in work, then in free time. And it's an environment that all of the developers have grown accustomed to, which is showing the direction on how well it works. And then when you take it to the organizational world, like now we see, for example, the data residency being addressed in EU, it's something that the developers already want to take into use. And the movement is actually easier that you have the toolchain consolidation and then already like the developer buy-in into the environment that you're providing.
Awesome. Matthias, would you like to jump in?
Yeah, so I think the topic is also very broad. So I think if we look at organizations and how they want to scale and be efficient on a platform, one example where we worked with the customer was on let's say it's also more on technical levels. So for instance, we worked on their CI/CD pipelines to make sure that it scales to accommodate the needs of the organization. And pipelines can be used for a lot of things, but it's certainly an important part of the compliance processes. So I mean, in a large organization, you want to make sure that the repositories are clean, that you commit good code in the big code base that a lot of engineers are working on. So you want to have your commits tied to a pull request that runs some checks. And to do this at scale, then you need a platform that scales with you. So we worked with another customer that they had about 2,000 engineers, and they wanted to be compliant. So whenever an engineer commits code, it should scan the code for vulnerabilities and errors and whatnot. And in order to keep up with a modern engineering team that are good, that would essentially commit many times per hour per developer, we ended up building a platform that could handle about 400 concurrent runs. And that's been great to work with GitHub because it has those capabilities. So you can scale out to run really large configurations like this. This is support large teams and allow us to implement the compliance and good governance practices. So that's just an example.
Jesse, you took yourself off mute a second ago.
Yeah. So another interesting thing I've seen is we've been helping organizations transform both kind of in agile, DevOps, SRE, whatever the latest buzzword is nowadays, and within that, a lot of practices come to mind, like continuous integration, automated testing, secret scanning, code quality things, and we're seeing that a lot of people have difficulty kind of grasping all of those concepts and kind of working them into their day-to-day lives. And so lately, we've seen people adopt Copilot to be able to much faster learn these kinds of techniques kind of with a basically continuous coach right next to them. And so it's been easier to get people to adopt these techniques, and it's been easier to help people, even if they're not doing test-driven development, at least ask Copilot to write the tests afterwards. Which is always better than having no tests afterwards. And then from there, it's much easier to get them to coach them towards a more test-driven workflow. And so we're seeing that kind of in a lot of different places, go from setting up CI in itself, automated testing, integrating all kinds of tools in the pipeline. And so this also allows teams with different backgrounds and different technologies to be able to kind of leverage that, instead of having a central team that has to juggle all the 400 different programming languages and tools and things that an organization has, because getting them all in one platform is kind of step one. But I don't see everybody migrating all their COBOL into whatever language it is that they're using nowadays. And so the consolidation only goes so far, unfortunately. And so we're seeing a lot of AI usage in that area, which is awesome.
Yeah, and you touched on a topic which I see as being quite important to our customers, certainly when they're looking at rolling out new capabilities, in particular things like Copilot, which are inherently, in a sense, less familiar to people, which is training. The importance of training your teams as you try to roll out capabilities, and not just assuming that everybody necessarily just knows how to do everything, but training them on your processes, your culture, how the tooling works, what the company's expectations or best practices for using that are super important. I'd love to hear from any of you in terms of your experience with how those training and rollout processes can make a difference to customer success with when they're trying to go through these transformation journeys.
Yeah, what we see, or what we do a lot with customers, is we take them on their cloud transformation. So that's one big okay, we want to be more agile, we want to build have better infrastructure. So hey, let's go into the cloud. And we come from the software development side. So infrastructure is, we need it, but we also need a good development process to actually leverage what we have. So we have the Ferrari with our cloud environment, but without the proper development processes and tools integrated, we can't leverage it. And that's what we have seen when we combine the infrastructure part with the dev tooling part and integrate them nicely into a seamless platform. Then it's where you can actually get the benefits. And training is it opens up completely new worlds to the ops people, to the dev people. It changes the way they are working, and the people transformation is the far bigger challenge than the technical transformation. And that's where we really early on start talking to the different people working with the platform, identifying gaps, where do we need to train them, introduce new tools like GitHub Copilot that can speed up the learning process and provide them better access to this new tools. And this really is key for this whole developer platform thing. because adoption only happens when the people understand the platform, and that's at the end you try to get adoption for the tooling and the environment you provide to the developers, and understanding that is key.
Marco.
Yeah, I would say so. I'm looking at things from the so-called technology adoption curve. So very often when you talk about developer experience or new technologies, so Copilot, obviously for most of the tech-savvy developers, is a tool that they just turn on and start using from day one. But when you look at the technology adoption curve, you have the innovators, the early adopters. Those are the ones that are just, they take these new tools into place, they prove their value in the organization.
Works.
But in these kinds of places where you go to a bigger organization, you have to actually start focusing on the so-called late majority and the laggards, and kind of how do you bring the levels of control and productivity into play. And now, for example, training and showing the value from different parts of the organization to the whole organization, to those people who are either, some of them are honestly reluctant, and some of them are not honestly so tech savvy to start taking these tools into use, and proving the value, and then using, for example, training, and then of course like examples where you can start like implementing them in the organization. That's where the developer happiness, developer experience that you start with the innovators, early adopters, start making the way into the whole organization. So Jesse already mentioned about the security tooling, and Matthias talked about the workflows. You can use templates in GitHub now. Those all are something that you work with your like the most like tech-savvy people in the organization, and then through GitHub you start expanding them into the organization, and training of course goes along.
And one thing that I learned when we started partnering with GitHub a number of years ago, that there was a good recipe from GitHub that we could build on as a partner, with very focused, very concrete short trainings, which was super good for enablement. And then what I also found was a really good practice was to have these office hours or recurring meetings where the teams could reconnect after the training. So you need to build that stickiness. And like you said, Marco, it's quite easy to convince the early adopters. Don't really need us either, but once you introduce the larger majority to something, they need to explore, and then they get the questions, and then they need somewhere to go and continue the conversation. So unless we're replaced by the co-pilots, I think office hours are a great way to keep connected with the engineering teams.
Especially for Copilot, because the features are not that obvious. How you can use it, in which way, in which scenarios it works good. It's some developers get ideas I never would have thought about. Yeah, that could really work very well. And building this community in the company to exchange, hey, look, we are doing this, and this works pretty good. This really drives the adoption and the value of Copilot at the end of the day.
Yeah, we're seeing it with most Copilot adoptions. We're helping people more setting up an internal knowledge sharing environment in which they can share prompts that they've used, interesting examples and things like that, which then also enables other people to see potential values in the product that they might initially not have found when they just turned it on. And then the metrics in the back end also help us to figure out which people have gotten a license but haven't been using them. So reaching out to them and trying to figure out what's causing. And some people just have too many meetings, and they open Visual Studio Code in the morning and they close it at the end of the day, and actually didn't write a line of code during the whole day. But for many other people, it's like, it's not giving me exactly what I want, and so I don't know how to proceed from here. And then just knowing the right shortcut sometimes already kind of helps. And so helping people with setting up the knowledge sharing. You mentioned office hours, short training, and we work with champion programs. So those early adopters, we try to recruit them as champions within an organization so that they can start if you've got a company offsite, do a demo of 5 minutes. If you've got a hackathon, do a short demo of that. And so it's been really, really interesting to kind of see all of these things. We had one architect from a customer who decided, I've been using Copilot for a year now, and so I already know how to make it use code. And during a hackathon, he challenged himself to basically write one of the products that he was working on without specifying anything about technology. And so he basically just went functional requirements only. So I need a web page with a logon screen on it. Go build it for me. And then from there he went. And then after you log in, I need something like this, and I need to store it into a database. And so suggest me a couple. Oh, that one sounds nice. And basically build the whole app without ever talking about like a line of code, like I don't like this, or use a switch statement or an if statement, but really sticking to all the functional stuff. And it was so awesome to see them kind of venture into these kind of areas instead of basically complaining to Copilot that the code it wrote isn't according to the programming standards that live in their head, basically. And so it's super, super interesting to kind of see different people adopt all of these tools in different ways.
Yeah. And it's easy to say already that we see that we've only had like Copilot's been there for 2.5 years almost, and generative AI as a whole, like a few years altogether. And you already see that what AI is doing, exactly as you just explained, it's going to be like, it's essentially AI explaining us how to communicate with computers. And the level of abstraction will just grow on the next upcoming years, and the way how we interact with the computer. Like I see Copilot being like the first step into the actual modern software development, whether it's using the same syntactic language that we use as programming languages today or something else. It's still something that we all know we have to adapt to the same way as when we started using phones for streaming and consuming social media.
Yeah, and one of the big leaps forward that GitHub is investing in with Copilot now is Workspace, which for any of you who are able to join us for GitHub Universe, which happened just last week, was a big focus of our keynote. And the idea of Workspace is taking just what Marco was saying around like a fully natural language-based development experience, both for the authors as well as reviewers of code, and try to bring these kind of Copilot agents in to do more and more of the work with you. From, okay, how do I go to a one-line issue with a, poorly written product manager hand-wavy spec into a definition of exactly what needs to be done that could be communicated to Copilot or could be communicated to another engineer on my team, and leveraging Copilot to do that, and then go from there into, as far as possible, production-ready code that you as a human have the ability to review, but in a kind of fully integrated workflow. And I think that's pretty exciting. It's certainly one of the big innovations that we're working on in the company to figure out how we can maybe reinvent some of the developer workflow through natural language. I'd love to ask, though, you all kind of touched on some of the impact of Copilot. Of course, one of the questions we get often, I'm sure one of the questions that you get often is, how do I measure the impact of it on my organization? How do I think about that? I'd love to hear some examples from you of how you advise customers to do that and some of the outcomes that you've seen customers be able to achieve. Florian?
Yeah. So usually when we start the adoption journey, we with measuring, we focus on the individual developer. Like one, we have the metrics API, quantitative metrics. How often do they use Copilot? How many suggestions, and so on? How many do they accept? So this is really on an individual developer. How well is it perceived? It doesn't give us really how much increase in productivity did the team gain, but we can see, okay, adoption is good. And then we also have qualitative measures. So basically asking the developers, how would you feel if we take Copilot away from you? So there we get the real feedback. how they feel about the tool and how they like it and what are the good use cases for them. And this is for the beginning, in the first phase, this is completely fine and really gives a good insight. Over the long run, where you want to actually move is to see if the velocity of the team increases. So looking at if you have an established DevOps team that knows how fast it can actually develop based on its sprint history and so on, then you can really start looking at what impact did we achieve when introducing Copilot to the development process. Yeah, and then you get a much better impression of the actual productivity gain. But it's far more complex, and it needs some history of the development performance of the team. So starting with really developer focused at the beginning, and then scaling on the team level. That's how we usually approach this.
Great.
Yeah, metrics are funny things. As soon as people know that they're being measured, they start paying attention to them. If you create a graph of them, everybody wants to have them see either go up or go down. But if they go the right way, people don't really ask questions. I've seen people saying, if we're introducing something like Copilot, we'll see people do more pull requests faster. Right? So, and that could be true. It could also be less pull requests because they're making fewer security bugs and other things, and so there's less fixes further on in the process, and so it becomes really difficult based on just high-level numbers to get to a right indication. And so, looking at things in the process that take a lot of time and are time-consuming, that might be quite useful. I've also been involved in a lot of Scrum training, and the problem with many Scrum teams is that their product owner has no idea what value actually means. And so we count things in number of things delivered and not necessarily in the right things delivered. And so getting more productive might actually mean doing more of the wrong stuff. And so you also have to be really careful that as your team speeds up, that you also start to focus on the things that really matter for the organization. But what I like a lot with this kind of new perceived productivity is it's much easier to spin up a real working example. So instead of showing somebody a PowerPoint and ask them, do you like this? We can use Copilot to actually build a working prototype in a very short period of time and get real feedback. And so that gives us a much better indication of whether they actually like it or not. I've been using the brainstorm feature in workspaces during refinement sessions. And so basically asking things like, hey, if we do this, are there potentially other places in the application that we should look like? What is the test coverage of these features like? And do we expect any issues there? So any things that are difficult to manually test, sometimes even those kind of questions can be answered. And so it's giving us a little bit more productivity there. The funnest thing I find is just saying, all right, this is our proposed solution. Can you tell us 3 other ways that we might be able to do it? Because humans are really bad at, once they kind of latched onto a solution idea, really bad at kind of imagining other things. It's psychologically hard. And so, and usually a better solution comes out. And so these things are hard to measure kind of quantitatively, but you get better solutions, you get higher quality, you have fewer bugs, and those things are actually measurable. And then hopefully happier customers. And so on. There's the output side of things, there's an outcome side of things. There's some huge interesting benefits.
Awesome. Matthias?
I think from a process perspective, we're kind of doing something very similar to Florian's approach, which I guess makes a lot of sense. You need to start somewhere and then inspect, adapt, and grow. But what's been quite interesting and a little bit concerning to us is that it's quite easy to focus on the low-level tasks, because the tools are really good at helping us with small things. So I guess more junior engineers, they would find it helpful to start building bits and pieces of small things, but they don't have the experience to understand if they're building something with good quality, good structure. So that's an area where we've seen that we need to coach more and do more training to focus on like the high-level tasks and then prompt the system differently to get help with with something at a different level. So I guess both, like you're talking about, Maya and Jesse, that more talk about the use case and the scenarios, and then you get a little bit different response. And that in itself, if you work in a team, then you can start exploring what the Copilot helps you with, and then you need to grow as a team to make sure you actually build something that is useful, matters, and it's maintainable and all that good stuff. So yeah, you need to think about quality, but I guess that's a coming iteration of Copilots as well, that they can help us make sure that the code is good as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've once, as deploying the Copilot to organizations, the bigger the organization, usually the top management is looking at things from metrics point of view. And even I've been last spring still quoting the GitHub's own research on you're going to be 55% faster when using GitHub Copilot. And I mean, of course, in big organizations, it's not true, because not all of your time is coding. So oftentimes big organizations might have like expectations that are way too high. What we've seen at our customers is that it's roughly somewhere around 10% in the beginning, which means that it's already 3 to 4 hours per week, which is ample, to be honest, like easy to get Copilot going if you know that you're going to save 3 to 4 hours per week. But there are two very, like Jesse already mentioned the other one, but two findings I want to share. The first one is that with using AI-driven development, and especially Copilots, the developers start to write more compliant and secure code. And we've seen it all over. When you add more metrics than the Copilot, like Copilot API or the velocity of the organization, if you actually add in, for example, the advanced security or some other security tools, you'll start seeing that there's something going on. There's less security issues. And that's something that Copilot automatically brings. And it's like, especially for the junior developers, it's a big change. But then on the other side, another finding that we've seen in big regulated organizations, that sometimes you actually might have to get an approval from the workers' union to be able to deploy Copilot, because the workers' unions are protecting the developers, the employees of the organization. And that also means that when you deploy AI-driven development, there is fear that it will take people's jobs. But we've already seen it's definitely not going to be true. We only see efficiency, productivity, and then capability of innovating. And kind of the worker unions we've been working with and seen have already been on the approving side after explaining this kind of a movement happening in the market.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm British, as I'm sure you can all tell, but I live in the US, so it's probably not such a driver in the US market as in some European ones. One thing I thought was interesting, though, was the point that a few of you made around how Copilot and these new tools can help the whole team become more effective. So it's not just about lines of code written. It's not just about number of pull requests. It's not even really just about number of builds or deployments, but ultimately are you giving more value to your customers? And, for me as a product manager, the ability for me to go in and just like prototype something that I couldn't do previously, or would have taken me like an amount of time that's just doesn't feel worth my effort, to check like, okay, are we building things that people actually love? Like, are they actually going to move the top line, the engagement, revenue for the company, which is, ultimately, generally for developers working in companies, what it's about. I think that's an interesting facet of the point you were making, Marco, around workers' unions and how you show the total impact of tools for the company, not taking jobs away, but creating more value in totality.
Worker unions are not the only thing, and especially in Germany, everyone wants Copilot, but then they opt, let's go with Copilot Business, because we can't move the code to GitHub US and so on. So that was really a big blocker, and we always showed them what's around the corner when you move from GitHub Copilot Business to Enterprise. and it's totally obvious that this is the actual game changer in the platform, like having auto fix on your security issues, and having peer review on your pull request with Copilot, and all these things that only work when you have the code in the platform. But up until now, they all had a reason, or it was the hurdle was too high to say, okay, let's see how we can get past our legal to move the code to GitHub Cloud. And this, with the EU offering, now unblocks this whole thing. And for us, it's really a game changer in Germany. I know Copilot is not yet fully regional, but I at least the code and everything stays in Europe, and this is a huge step forward for our enterprise customers.
Yeah, absolutely. And a few weeks ago, it was also released that GitHub is going into the direction where you can plug it into a trained engine, which will boost it up even more. So yes, definitely exciting. Good comment.
Yeah, and so data residency is clearly a big deal for a lot of companies working in Europe and outside of Europe as well. I assume, though, that many of you also work with large global enterprises, that they're not just necessarily operating in one location. They have business units around the world. For those like complex enterprises where maybe data residency in one country isn't all that they feel that they need, how do you kind of advise them to think about how they deploy their tooling and how they move to the cloud, whilst also meeting all of those different regional requirements? Like, it's definitely a challenge. I would love to hear how do you advise people to think about that?
On the GitHub side, it has until now always been a relatively easy conversation. Right? It was either or you run it, or you ask a partner like Xebia to run it for you, or you're not on GitHub. and so for the GitHub side, it was, and now with the advent of basically GitHub Enterprise Cloud stamps across the globe, this now becomes a lot more interesting. We saw something very similar previously around Azure DevOps, which follows a very similar model. And it's not strange because a lot of the people that worked on Azure DevOps now work at GitHub. And so we've worked with big enterprises that had like a European stamp of Azure DevOps, and one in America and one in Asia, also for performance reasons, sometimes for legal entity reasons, like people working for a subcontractor or a different entity, or should not have any access to certain kinds of code. And so looking at big enterprises, there's always going to be some way in which you're going to have to slice and dice and fragment these, or what these GitHub organizations look like. Now, on the Azure side of things, for us, that's slightly different because that's often there's a runtime component to it. So you might have requirements of uptime, of scalability, and then things like availability of virtual machines in data regions comes into play. And,
what are you talking about?
yeah. And we have a large development center and customer base in the AEU, and so there's a new Azure data center, but it doesn't have all of the features yet. And so which features are enabled where kind of also comes into play. And so it's a really interesting kind of puzzle that both enables you, but also limits you in certain kind of interesting ways, depending on the requirements that the customer has. And so it's usually a more application by application, architecture by architecture kind of story that you need to piece out to ultimately decide where things land. And I think that's kind of also what's happening at GitHub, right? It used to run all in the US, it's now running elsewhere. I've already seen huge performance gains of connecting to the European stamp over having to download everything from the US. And so even that's useful. But I can see people having a my company -EU and a my company -US and a my company Asia Pacific a GitHub instance at some point, unfortunately. Probably they're going to still have to manage all three of them separately, but maybe
will
in
see.
and that will kind of be married up at some point again as well.
But at least you get your own namespace.
Yes.
So this flexibility using organizations and providing self-service to departments or teams is a big benefit, similar to having a landing zone in the cloud where the teams can build their own infrastructure. Now you have a GitHub organization where they can use enterprise provided shared resources like pipelines and so on, but still have a lot of freedom within their organization. And this was always, like in the cloud version, not possible. You had name conflicts and everything needed to be unique. And now with the new data residency offering, you have your own namespace and you have the full freedom of organizing. And then having all the policies pushed to the enterprise level still provides our large enterprise customers the possibility to, similar to the cloud, have the policies out on top and give freedom as much as possible down to the organizations. And that's really cool. Now both the infrastructure side and the dev platform side kind of match up in that kind of way. So we have a platform team that manages the whole enterprise, and we have dedicated teams in their organizations that can do much of the work themselves, and that's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's for us, of course, it's interesting to see that when the production environments have mostly moved to cloud already, and most of these problems have been addressed, but now the tooling stack is also moving very fast into cloud. We work with, for example, Atlassian. Atlassian is something that integrates perfectly into GitHub, and the data residency is kind of an issue in both. And we see that organizations are already ready to take the steps to move towards cloud, and also they're enforced to go to cloud. And these kind of the data residency solutions are something that then work as an intermediate on being able to serve these customers better from the tooling point of view. So faster releases, security, maintenance, all the support work. But then on the other side, to be able to follow the regulations, and as Jesse already said, like the being able to regionalize the data that you would be using, which is come easier. And also I have to mention on top, for example, with GitHub, with the data residency, you can still have your open source strategy in public GitHub, and you can sync between very, very fluently. So it's something that organizations hopefully will also build the open source and so-called inner source using those kinds of models.
What I think also is quite interesting is that, I mean, a lot of companies have moved, like you say, Marco, the production environments, the systems to the cloud. So they've gone through the governance and compliance work. So they know about, information classification and all that good stuff. But now we need to do the same for development data. And that helps in a way, because then at least you know how to partition things, what you need to keep local and what you can have global. So at least that's something that enterprises know. In some departments, it just has to come down into the development departments now. And then what we see now, and that's not specific to having a European stamp of GitHub, but when you move to the cloud, of course, you need to do that information classification and data cleaning. So it's great with the platform that at least helps with figuring out if you have sensitive information in your on-prem repositories when you start moving out to the cloud. That's a bit of homework you need to do, and we need to have good architects that understands how to set up these topologies and do the data migration and all that in a good way. But at least we have the tools and the platform. So exciting times.
Nice. So let's talk more about migrations. Migrations are often very top of mind for our customers, particularly when talking about cloud. Okay, how do I get there? Sounds great. How do I get there? And we have a lot of customers on GitHub Enterprise Server, other server, or on-prem products in the market, or customers on ADO interested in getting more out of Copilot and Copilot Enterprise on GitHub. And I know that all of you work hard with our customers on migrations, both from like planning, execution, process changes. So it can be a big, complex process. I would love to hear, like, if when you're talking to a customer and they're just starting to get their head around a migration, like, what should I think about? Where do you direct them? And Matthias, let's start with you.
Oh, yeah, I mean, apart from reaching out to a good partner that can help them. I think you need to understand what you need to migrate and what the end goal should look like. And it's quite easy to forget a lot about the details in doing the migration, because this is production data for the development teams, and it's the factory you build your software on. So it's easy to think of, okay, we're only going to move the current code. But maybe that's not that easy, because compliance reasons forces you to have history. And then when you start to look at history, what is that? Yeah, that's typically connection to the tickets, the requirements that drives change, and could be to pull request that contains a lot of the information about why you're making the changes. So I think one big part of preparing for migrations is to understand the scope and what it is that you need to take into account. And then I think the next part is to actually do the migration in a way that works for the enterprise. So take advantage of automation and do a lot of self-service is a good recipe from us. So we can enable the teams to do the migration at their own pace, give them the tools to do it, and enable a sort of a self-service solution for it.
Yeah, we've built something similar, and as part of it, we scan basically every repository for potential problems. You might not want to migrate all of your problems straight into your new environment. And so looking for security vulnerabilities and secrets, you probably want to kind of iron them out prior to migration if you still can. Moving some binary files is sometimes a requirement. GitHub has on the cloud some more stringent constraints than other platforms might have. And so not everything that lives either in a Bitbucket or an Azure DevOps instance can be migrated into GitHub without causing trouble. And so there's some data transformation going even at the repo level. And so it's a really interesting kind of engagement. We recommend to work with the teams and to basically have each team migrate their own stuff. Like Matthias mentioned, often teams have dependencies, and so figuring out kind of what the organization looks like, not only because you're going to have to replicate that somehow into the target environment, there's also kind of a specific order of things that might kind of get into play there as well. One of the things that we found, especially from GitHub to GitHub migrations, is that GitHub is such an embraced platform. So many integrations, like on Azure DevOps, there's a very limited number of extensions that people tend to install into their environment. On GitHub, for some reason, everybody enables everything that they can find. And so migrating all of those things over also is a really interesting kind of a problem, especially for the new EU stamp. Not everything has been yet kind of published into the marketplace there. And so there's new integrations to set up, and vendors need to start supporting that. And so that is an interesting kind of new problem, basically, that we didn't have when we moved from Team Foundation Server to what's now called Azure DevOps, for example, which usually was kind of a pretty self-contained migration. And it had the same user and team structure in the source, and now it's the same user and team structure in the target. Moving to GitHub for many people introduces not just changes in the repos and that, but the team structure is different, the security model is different, the policy model is different. And so And usually you only find out exactly what it should be after the migration is done. And so, because that's when they start using it, the people themselves start to realize kind of what they want constrained and what they want secured and how. And so it's usually a long and fluent process, but not necessarily a very time-consuming one. And so by letting teams move by themselves, you can take the pace that fits with the organization. And after having figured out how to do 1, 2, or 3, you can take those best practices and start applying them to the other teams as well. And so usually we do see that in these migrations, the first few, if you selected the most painful ones correctly, will be quite painful. And then once you got through that, then the rest of them will speed up drastically. And so that's a super useful kind of approach to that. So we try to cherry pick from the teams and try to find the ones that we think will give us the most learning. And then with that learning are able to kind of then accelerate the further migrations for the rest of the teams to be able to get their stuff across.
Yeah, that's interesting. Both in rolling out something like Copilot as well as doing migrations, like pick who you start with. And be strategic about who you start with and then how you roll that, learn from that group and then roll that out across the wider organization. Florian.
What we usually do is we really establish a platform team for GitHub, similar to the Cloud Foundation team or however you want to call it, that prepares everything for the migration. So setting up the accounts correctly, setting up the identity management, providing the clear scope for the projects to work in, providing them maybe also already integration for private CI/CD, private action runners, and so on. So to actually be able to migrate and then scale afterwards. Yeah? Often, like in the old world, someone set up the Bitbucket and the Jira server, and then everyone started to work with them. That doesn't work in that case if you really want to scale. So having a platform team that prepares everything and all the structures and the convenience integrations with all the other tools and infrastructure is very important to then get the first candidates on the platform, see how everything works, if it works as designed, and then iteratively start moving more and more teams to the new environment and learn from the migrations and do it better next time. And
and I see actually there are two different directions. So first of all, we still see that we're migrating from different version control systems altogether. So for example, in gaming companies, oftentimes still Subversion is used because of the different way of handling the large files. Of course, GitLF is addressing these issues, and with the data residency, once again, you're in a good place with that. But still, when you do the migration, you actually might start from further down the road because you have to get people from Subversion to Git, and it's a different way of working, and you might not it might not be just jumping into from GitHub to GitHub, but that's, of course, it's beside the point. As said, the way you already described here is one of the key things. The second thing I see is kind of the production deployments. So when you change and migrate over, if you have your production already working in continuous delivery, continuous deployment way, that will be a bit of a hassle. So you have to kind of transfer everybody. You have to have maybe canary releases, some of the microservices already moved, and then you can show the value and flip the switch. But then we also today see organizations that are extensively using GitOps, which means that they have their whole infrastructure already defined in code and in Git, which means that then we go back to what Jesse already said, like it might be just you go from Git to Git and people are already familiar with it and your infra moves on the same go. So it could be anything from a 2-year training process to like, not 15 minutes, but 1 day migration, essentially. Even while it sounds weird, you can actually do it that way as well.
Often even within the same company. Like one team's still using CVS and the other one, like we see a lot.
It's like archaeology.
The most interesting thing that we also encounter is the fact that since often you're reconnecting to different production environments, the secrets have to basically be reconfigured on the target environment.
Yeah.
If they go through like a consultant's hands, you should recycle them before taking them truly into production, right? And so A is trying to find all of those secrets. Many organizations have somebody that left 4 years ago, copy and pasted them in a text box, and that was it. And so it's a really interesting lesson in cleaning up security problems for many organizations, because a lot of organizations are not used to recycling secrets, and they're absolutely not used to kind of revoking all of their secrets at once while they're doing a migration. And so we tend to not just have like a GitHub center of excellence available on our hands, but involving like your CISO and sysadmin in these cases is you might involve them as early as possible, because you're going to be creating some headaches for them along the way, and so having them informed and understanding what is happening and why that is important as well is really, really important. And it allows us as well to kind of help them migrate those things into like an Azure Key Vault or an equivalent thing on another cloud platform. And so it's immediately a great way to just strengthen their stance on security kind of in general, because I want to get away with encrypted files in a Git repo where somebody has to type a password, because one of the problems with Git is if it's in your history, it's never going to be out. So they might not have the password now, but if you've had that in your history for 5 years, now I have 5 years to crack that password, right? And so, and as that speed starts to pick up, those things might actually start to leak at some point in time. I don't know what people will be able to do with it. Hopefully, everybody's recycling their production passwords on a very, very irregular cadence, but we all know that not everybody kind of sticks to that.
Absolutely.
Having no passwords at all is the best.
Yeah, that's the ideal.
I really enjoy identity federation between GitHub and Azure.
Yeah.
So that's
really things like that is it's so awesome. Yeah.
All right, I think we have about 2 minutes remaining. So with that, I thought I would just ask each of you maybe for a 30-second, if there's one thing that you think people should think about when they're going through transformation journeys, tool consolidation, AI adoption, which maybe is often not top of mind enough. What would your one thing be? And you'll only have 30 seconds. Okay, I'll choose first. Jesse, you go first.
So what I'd say is that for people that are using Copilot and haven't yet found the spark with it yet, invest in learning some prompt engineering techniques. There's some really awesome stuff you can do, and we teach this on a daily basis, and I still learn new things from people that I meet in classes as well as from colleagues, and there's so much potential out there.
Awesome. Florian?
Understand your customers, meaning your developers. That's something we really learned. It's like doing personas, doing like user journeys with our developers through the process. That really, really helps to understand the needs of the actual developers. And this is really helpful in designing the platform itself.
Yeah, platforms are products, and your users are your teams, your employees.
Know your customers.
Yeah.
Yep.
Matthias?
Yeah, don't forget to have fun, because there's a lot of work. I really enjoy talking to the teams that we work with, having them check out the release notes and the blog posts. I don't know if that's fun, but for me that's fun. And then you can do all sorts of exercise in trying out new things. So don't forget that.
Awesome. And Marco?
We have the DevOps conference running. Yesterday we were in Copenhagen and tomorrow in Stockholm, and I'm on stage there. And one of the things I've said, and I will say tomorrow as well, is that developer platforms and AI-driven development are the two key initiatives that are running they are building the operational efficiency and driving innovation within organization. And GitHub is in a unique position because it provides both the developer platform and the AI-driven development. And that's easy place to start and go to.
Amazing. Awesome. All right. Well, I just want to say thank you very much to all four of you for joining us today. As I said, I've been at GitHub for a number of years now, and I personally learned a number of things from listening to you. So I hope that everybody else did too. And with that, I think we are a wrap on this session. I hope everyone got anything about it, and I think we can all say goodbye. All right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye. Bye.